I can't do that. That's not for me. I'm not able to do that. Thinking about the outdoors and outdoor activities can be intimidating for people living with a bleeding disorder, especially if you, like me, didn't grow up spending much time in the woods, or at a lake, or in the mountains. But is that really true? Are the outdoors and experiential education in the outdoors really off limits to people with bleeding disorders? Well, that's what we're here to discuss. Welcome to episode 9, our outdoor education episode of the Ask the Expert podcast. I'm your host, Patrick James Lynch, and today's guest is GutMonkey Founder and CEO, Big Dog himself, Pat Torrey. Pat Torrey unwittingly began his career traversing mountains and rivers, working at camps, and in therapeutic wilderness programs across the country. Along the way, he discovered the power that shared experiences in awe-inspiring environments can have on individuals' lives, and he got hooked. Pat's work as a challenge course facilitator, builder, and adventure education trainer has focused on the professional development of youth educators and the facilitation of personal growth within organizations. Pat founded GutMonkey in 2005 and hasn't looked back. His passion for quality professional training has inspired him to continue traversing mountains and rivers, but to also delivering engaging and animated keynote speeches and workshops presented at regional, national, and international events. He has designed and implemented experiential and adventure education trainings and expeditions for professionals and staff teams nationwide. So today, Pat joins us to discuss the philosophy of outdoor experiential education and some of the experiences that he's had that crystallize why he does what he does. That's the conversation coming up in just a moment, right after this quick word from, well, me again. Just before we get to this interview, I just want to take a minute to talk with you about what it is that I'm doing over here with BloodStream Media and podcasting for the bleeding disorders community. My company, Believe Limited, started BloodStream Media to create a network of podcasts, a network of free audio resources for people affected by bleeding disorders. The BloodStream podcast hits on big news, big stories, and interviews with active community members, and uses contributions from the community to spotlight the various segments of our population. I co-host that with my wife, yoga instructor and doula, Natalie. The Powering Through podcast features panel conversations on obstacles, challenges, and what it takes to overcome. It features community members and special guests, and is recorded in front of live community audiences. The Bloodline series is our This American Lifestyle series, featuring deep dives into important community topics. Our first series on life with von Willebrand disease is composed of over 24 interviews with patients, clinicians, and thought leaders, and, if I may, is super cool and unlike anything else that's out there. And, of course, we have this podcast, Ask the Expert, featuring interviews with community experts on treatment, lifestyle, and advocacy issues. I'm really proud of what we've been able to do with these pods and the thousands of community members that we have reached through them. I think we are balancing entertainment, education, and empowerment really well and creating truly engaging, resourceful podcasts. But I need your help. I need your help to make sure that we keep reaching more people, because while awareness of podcasts is at an all-time high, there are still many people who don't exactly know what they are or how to find them. And sometimes I meet community members who have never heard of podcasts, and I just know that they are exactly the type of people who would benefit from listening to BloodStream Media's pods. So, you're listening. Obviously, you figured out how to engage with podcasts. Nicely done. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Please leave us a review on iTunes if you haven't already. And please help one person you know find their way to listening to this episode. Maybe a community parent that you know who's nervous about the new school year, or maybe a volunteer in your local community who can help share this with more parents in your area. I'm a big proponent of the value of podcasts and a big believer in the power of community. If our community gets behind pushing out podcasts as a form of communicating, educating, and empowering one another, we'll be stronger and better for it. All right, that's the end of my pitch. Thanks for listening. So thank you, Pat, very much for setting aside some time today to talk to us about the outdoors and the bleeding disorders community from your perspective. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely, Patrick. My pleasure. Thanks for having me here.
So we'll get into the work that you're doing with GutMonkey specifically in just a little bit, but I want to first give people an opportunity to learn a little more about you and how the outdoors and activity in the outdoors first came into your life. So tell us a little bit about growing up. Where were you growing up, and how did the outdoors come into your life in a meaningful way?
Yeah, sure thing. I grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts, so kind of a blue-collar town in central Massachusetts in New England, and was just real fortunate. Happened to get into Cub Scouts as a little kid and moved up into Boy Scouts, and happened to have one of those troops that was a little less focused on rank and merit badges. And although we did that, was a lot more focused on outdoor trips. And so in my teenage years, I was really fortunate to do 100-mile canoeing trips up in northern Ontario, and had gone rock climbing by the time I was 15, and had done some real basic mountaineering by the time I was 18, and hundreds of miles of backpacking on trails all over New England. And so that was just a big part of growing up. And then went to college and, quite frankly, lost it for a year, even though I was at the University of Vermont. And then, I was surrounded by it and just really missing it. So a friend of mine and I decided to start a program, like a wilderness program in a community-driven living space where you could run programs. And we started a wilderness leadership one, and they usually have about 15 applicants, and our program had 130 applicants that year. And so we were excited and managed to get to college to pay for gear, which felt like quite an accomplishment. And it just kind of it developed from there. The advisor for my program happened to be an ex-outbound instructor and program leader, and really became my mentor moving forward, and really developing like a vision of what my career could be. Not that it had anything to do with bleeding disorders at that time, but definitely in the outdoor adventure realm.
Yeah. So then, how did you come to land on creating GutMonkey specifically, and take us through how that led you to finding the bleeding disorders community eventually?
Yeah, it actually flip-flopped a little bit. I did wilderness therapy work and was a backpack instructor for at-risk youth for years, and worked with kids with really intense ADHD diagnoses. There's a word in there somewhere.
Diagnoses, somewhere in there.
And so so I did that work, and then I built ropes courses, challenge courses, rock climbing towers for a while training professionals in that, and running events for groups, and just happened to have one day as our group, the Hemophilia Foundation of Oregon's summer camp staff. And I found out that morning I was basically running their staff training, and had a bonding experience on the ropes course. And it was absolutely life-altering. Come to see later on. I really fell in love with them. They took a liking to me, and we kept finding ways to be in each other's world. And I ended up coming to their camp, and over time, figuring out a way to develop some adventure programming within their camp, and then running their staff trainings. And then in the world of, small worlds within bleeding disorders, there were people from a lot of other camps at that camp. And so I started getting calls, and then was real lucky to attend the second, the North American Camping Conference of Hemophilia Organizations, NACHO, which is an international camp conference for bleeding disorder camps, and made it to their second one, and have been an active part of that program ever since.
In general, can you give us a 60-second pitch on why is outdoor experiential education important in general, and important in particular for people with bleeding disorders? Yeah.
Another mentor of mine, Mike Gass from the University of New Hampshire, once said that one of the pieces that's so key within experiential education is that we want folks to have as novel of an experience as possible, while at the same time getting to work on things that are as parallel to their real life as they can get. And so you can't get much more of a novel experience when you're looking at how do I manage my health care more effectively when I'm going to college than being in a sea kayak for a week. Those are two really different experiences, but all of the same things that come up psychosocially, all of the same things that come up from a management's perspective come up in both realms. So we can really use that experience as a large metaphor to create opportunities to examine the things that folks are doing well, could do better, in their existing life around managing their healthcare, believing in their own abilities more, really figuring out what it is that they want to do, dismantling the stigma that they have around their own bleeding disorders and other people bleeding disorders in their life, especially if they're a caregiver. And so whether we're doing something on a ropes course, or we're doing an activity that just looks like a silly game, or we're on a week-long sea kayaking trip in the San Juan Islands in Washington State, we have those opportunities, and we develop them very intentionally, and with the opportunity for reflection with skilled facilitators, running discussions to really help folks solidify those lessons. That's where we really get to the magic and the juicy learning and the important transference that gets cemented to attitude and behavior change when folks go home.
And when you talk about dismantling that stigma, are there common misconceptions that you have found people in the bleeding disorders community have in general about hiking, camping, kayaking, and the outdoors at large? Common misconceptions that you can deconstruct for us right now?
I'd say there's both common misconceptions about doing things in the outdoors, as well as there's common misconceptions about what they're able to do just in general with a bleeding disorder. And so in general with a bleeding disorder, I think that there's a lot of places where folks, just because of the scripts that folks have and have heard throughout their lives, so often they're just can so immediately go to that place of, well, that's just not for me, or that's not for people with hemophilia. And I wouldn't say that's everybody by any means, but those are things that a lot of people have heard throughout their life. And so they might see something and be like, oh, that looks amazing. I mean, I'm not going to do that, but it sure looks good for somebody. And so that's why part of when we are trying to share these experiences, it's not just a picture of somebody in a sea kayak that says, this guy has hemophilia. It's a video of somebody who has hemophilia or von Willebrand's disease who's infusing in the cockpit of their sea kayak, or 10 feet down a 60-foot rappel on a rock wall, so that folks can go, wow, that person has a bleeding disorder too, and they are doing something that I never thought I could do, and I wonder what I could do. So that's kind of like the bleeding disorder side of it, summed up real tight. But I think, there's just a lot of common misconceptions about what it means to go get outside and the benefits of it. When we look at getting outside in nature, especially in the time that we're in, the benefits are countless. And I think that we don't recognize how much time we spend plugged in and not focused and, kind of multitasking in our minds, because there are just so many things going on. I feel like an old person whenever I say it, but the research is really backing that up. And, I'm the first one to pull my phone out, but the reality is that every time I do that, I lose focus from something else that I was doing, and that doesn't necessarily help my process. But when you throw the realities of having a bleeding disorder on top of that, there's just a whole other level of things that need to be on somebody's mind, whether that's, ordering their factor or infusing that day, or wondering if that pinch in their knee at that moment is a bleed or not, and what they should do about it, and, so on and so forth. And so with that, to have an opportunity to just stop and let the mind relax, even though there's a lot going on in nature, it's a different type of environment that allows the mind to really relax. And the physical benefits alone of decreased heart rate, decreased blood pressure, lower cortisol levels, all have research to back them up now. And those types of things can occur in 15 minutes of being in a park, never mind 2 days on a camping trip. So I always tell folks, going outside doesn't necessarily mean you're hanging off of a 2,000-foot rock wall, although there are people that do that. It could be that you throw a tent up in your backyard and you just leave the phones inside for an evening, or you go for a walk in the park and you take your shoes off and you go for a little, get your toes in the mud a little bit, or it means that you find a wildlife conservancy area that has a paved trail through it, but that you can actually sit there and watch a bald eagle for an hour. And that really there are so many accessible ways to get outdoors, that I always try to encourage people to look outside of the common view of what it means to be out in nature, because when we look at our Facebook page these days, the visions of nature is somebody, going Mach 2 down a hill on a mountain bike, or,
Right.
doing a double backflip on skis. And it's like, oh, skiing. Well, that's certainly not for me. Well, cross-country skiing is a pretty low-impact sport, and certainly something that, with the right type of research and the right type of, self-IDing about yourself and your abilities, and conversations with your HTC medical professionals is something that someone with a bleeding disorder could certainly get into. But it's easy to just think that's not for me, when all of the, or a lot of the media that we see day to day kind of reflects it in this, alter, or, really, really large, grand, extreme version of itself.
So that's interesting, because what I'm hearing is that to some degree, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're implying that while there might be a mindset of, well, that isn't for me, when somebody experiences one of the GutMonkey programs, and not that this is the only way that one can discover this, but it sounds like from your experience, people realize that that's not necessarily true once they're engaged and they're actually a part of, this kayaking trip. Suddenly I can do this, or there's a way for me to do this. But for those who are not there, it's one thing to learn as you're doing it and actually experiencing it. But how do you break through that perception of this isn't for me, to bring people to GutMonkey programs? Have you found ways to break through that way of thinking that allows people to actually show up and learn that indeed that's not the case?
Yeah. I think there's a couple things. One is always to share other people's stories. It's one thing to be the first person that, GutMonkey ever took out on a trip. But when we look at the number of people that have been out now, the first few guys that went out with us, like, they were folks that were already into the outdoors, and they were really physical, and they were athletes, and that was kind of expected. But now, looking at the fact that we've had, 5 years, and we're now looking at our, what would that be, 12, 14, 14 of these Leading Acts week-long expedition programs, a whole bunch of the people that have been on those trips, I would say a majority of them are folks that don't have the outdoors as a big part of their life, and certainly not in a, getting in your sea kayak that you just packed, paddling to a new island, unpacking it, living out, from what you have in your boat with a small group of people, and then doing that again day after day, navigating from place to place. It's just not a lot of people's norms. And so I love to share the stories. I love to share the stories of folks that have done that for the first time, and the fact that it's not easy all the time at first, and that, we call that type 2 fun a lot. That's the stuff that in the moment might not feel fun, but as soon as you look back on it, you're like, that was some of the most fun I've ever had in my life. I just needed to not be doing it at that moment to actually realize it was fun,
Right.
because it includes a level of challenge sometimes. And so sharing that, one, the challenge is okay. Like, as long as you're participating in a way that's safe, and you've got good plans, and you've thought about what you're doing, like, it's all right for it to be hard at first, because most new things are hard when we try them for the first time.
Sure.
And and the second part of that for me is always for us to be compassionate with folks, and to ask people to be compassionate with themselves, and know that anything that we're doing, you can choose to do it or not do it. And if you go out to try something and it's not amazing the first time, that's okay, and just to suggest that they give it a couple more tries. I learned how to snowboard when I moved to Sandpoint, Idaho when I was 22, and everyone told me, like, it takes 3 days, and those first 3 days were awful. I was like, I cannot believe that people like doing this. And then, I got my 3 days in. Day 4, I was like, oh, I know how to snowboard. And I certainly wasn't good, but I was like, I get it now. And I had to have those few days of kind of moving through it. And so, I think it's real easy for folks to get frustrated sometimes with the fact that they don't know how to do something. But like anything, if you haven't spent a lot of time doing it, like it's really okay. And that, to do things with people that are supportive and excited to just go out and try and make mistakes together is a great attitude to have when you go out, and that you can make it really small. Like, it really doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a hike where you go out and you hike for a mile. But I always suggest to folks, like, find something where there's a big payoff, like there are places, I live in Portland, Oregon, so I've got some good opportunities, but like there are, 20-mile hikes to get to a waterfall. There's also like quarter-mile hikes to get to waterfalls. Like, that's maybe a better place to start.
And while something like, the Leading X week-long backcountry adventures helps you build that community, you have facilitators who are helping you crystallize learning opportunities, reflect. So obviously tremendous value to something like that. But another point that you've made a couple times now is how the outdoors and what it means to engage with the outdoors, it runs the gamut. It can be simple. It can be as simple as something that might be right in your backyard. It might literally be spending more time in your backyard. Are there any just tips and tricks for people like me who might want to start leaning in to the outdoor life more so than they have in the past?
Yeah, I think something that's just a real, like, important survival rule is the rule of threes. Like, you can last for about 3 hours without shelter in like really bad environments or real tough environments, right? Like, you're in Antarctica and it's -70. You got about 3 hours if you don't have good clothes and a tent or a house or something like that. You can go 3 days without water. You can go 3 weeks without food. And a lot of people get into trouble because they don't think about how do I, even if I'm just going out for a little bit, how do I take care of myself? And often the people that are, experienced and have, are set up to go out on an expedition, when things come up, it's not a big deal because they have all the skills and they have all the supplies. But it's the, hey, let's just wander down this trail for a couple hours. That's where people tend to get into trouble. So,
Right.
Even if I go on a short little adventure, no matter how small it is, I always like pack my little, like, got everything in it kit. And it's small, it's like 10 pounds, but with the stuff that's in there, it's kind of my like basic key, 10 key elements. I can do a lot because, one, who wants to be the guy that runs an adventure program that gets stuck out in the woods without his stuff? And two, I'm often with other people and I want to take care of myself so I can take care of them in those scenarios. And so thinking about shelter and food and water and how do I get in touch with help if I need it, whether that's at a minimum a cell phone, but a lot of times cell phones don't work. So, we carry a little GPS unit that allows us to text search and rescue if we ever needed such a thing. Other types of signaling, ways to purify water, ways to start a fire, and so, shelter could just be like, good layers and a tarp. But once again, you kind of need to know how to set that up. So like taking the time to figure that stuff out is great. But on the bleeding disorder side, there's just that extra layer of preparation. And so I always suggest talking to the folks at your HTC and having a real conversation with them and letting them know you're going to do that. And if you find someone that says like, well, we would just not do it, like, find somebody else to talk to, because there are plenty of physicians and nurses and physical therapists now that are really excited about people getting out there and are willing to work with folks and talk about strategies for, how to take care of yourself, whether it's like taping your ankle up ahead of time or making sure that you've got a knee brace or that you're wearing your knee brace for the whole hike that, could really help. Certain little things like bringing trekking poles with you, especially for folks that have, a target ankle or a target knee or anything like that. Having trekking poles can really take the pressure off of your legs, especially going downhill, and make a huge difference in what you're doing. And especially if you're not used to, walking around on those types of terrains, it helps if you do slip a little bit. So you stumble and catch yourself versus stumble, fall, and then you potentially have other things to deal with. And no matter how far out you're going, I just always encourage folks, as much as it's not always what folks want to do, because it might be a little more weight or there's the inconvenience of having to go back to get it. Just bring what you need to treat. I think most folks in the community know that, early treatment, if you get a bleed, is going to make a big difference. And
Mm-hmm.
if that stuff is, not only is it potentially at the trailhead, there's a good chance that even once you get back to the car, it's another 2-hour drive back to the place. And, what can happen in that 4-hour period? It's, that's the difference between you going to work the next day or, being laid up for a few. So, I think that's, something that gets talked about a lot in this community, but I don't think it can be stressed enough. When we have folks come out on our trips, we're pretty serious about them bringing, any of the normal treatment that they would bring, and then a couple emergency doses, because if you've got what you need out there, great, we can do a lot with that. If you don't have that, there's a lot of ways for me to, improvise a splint or a sleeping bag, even if I had to, but I cannot improvise factor. Like, that would be a really cool trick, but I just cannot do it. And so, I can't say enough about just making sure that you've got what you need.
How many years has it been since you started GutMonkey officially?
Yeah, GutMonkey's been around for 12 years, and I started working with the community about 17 years ago.
Okay. Well, so then if we go 17 years community, 12 years GutMonkey, what with regard to the community itself and being someone expert in outdoor experiential education, is there a particular takeaway or a particularly big lesson learned that you've experienced that you could share with us? And somewhat related question, how does that and how has all of your experience working with this community? You mentioned in the beginning being prepared to, or it sounded like being prepared to serve a greater chronic disease and chronic disorder population. How has all of this led to your vision for GutMonkey going forward? So biggest takeaway to date, or one of your biggest takeaways to date, and what's the vision for GutMonkey going forward?
Yeah, I had a conversation with a friend of mine a couple of years into my work, and he was saying, I was giving him, the concept for some program, and who knows, it could have even been Leading X, because a lot of folks who I told about, Leading X and taking people out for a week in the backcountry, that got a lot of flack at first. Folks were just like, we don't do that, and it's not going to go well, and everyone's going to have to wear body armor, and like, it just, it got a little, it didn't get the best response. And a friend of mine who has a bleeding disorder and works a lot in the community said, you're the guy that's willing to push it a little bit. And I was like, well, hold on a second, I don't, intentionally create unsafe scenarios. And he said, no, but nobody wants to be the parent or the coach or the teacher that, ask their kid to do something and then they get a bleed. I'm like, I get it. And I don't want to be the person that does that either. He's like, I know, but you're at least willing to have the conversation and look at, look at finding a way or modifying or getting in there and figuring out a way to do that. And then, and then letting folks do some learning along the way that might include a little bumps or minor bruising, as you go.
Sure.
And in that space, he's like, there's just not a lot of folks that are always willing to do that. And I think that is part of our model, that the safety of our participants and our staff is our absolute number one priority. And we take that absolutely seriously, and we train for that at an incredibly high level. And still, with that said, we have to be willing to go out, and, the definition of adventure really is like not knowing all the outcomes. If we knew exactly what was going to happen and our participants knew exactly what was going to happen on the outset, it really wouldn't be an adventure. It would just be a known prescriptive experience, like going to see a movie. For the most part, we know we're going to go in, we're going to eat the popcorn, we're going to see the thing, we're going to leave at the end. And so, I with something like this, with an adventure, there is some uncharted territory, and things are going to happen, and that's part of it. And I had to really, for myself, find what I was comfortable with there. And then the more that I found that I could be comfortable with folks not always having the answers, or us not always having the answers, it really made a big difference in how we were able to approach the programs. And I think really see the benefit of folks getting out there and having to problem solve on their own. Like the very first time that we did a Leading X trip, one of the guys was like, well, hey, we're in this boat and we're going out to that island. It's like 4 miles away. And I was like, sure. And he's like, well, what if I get a bleed? I'm like, what if you get a bleed? He's like, well, I'll probably need to infuse. I was like, well, then you should infuse. And he was like, well, can you infuse in a sea kayak? And I was like, I don't know. Can you? And he's like, well, I don't know. And so I was like, well, maybe you should figure it out. And that's when that group got all their supplies out and pushed their boats off the beach and gave it a try. And they were like, oh yeah, you can infuse from a sea kayak or from the, seat of a canoe. And that's become a big part of our program ever since, is to challenge people to, start to take elements of their healthcare and the management of their healthcare that they have to do every day, and find ways to do that in challenging scenarios, because someday back in their life when they have to infuse in a place that's not ideal, or they have to have a conversation with an insurance agency that's really challenging, or they have to advocate for themselves in a significant way, they've already practiced that. They already have experience. They have a memory of that. Their self-efficacy has been improved because of that, because they had to do that out in the outdoors, out in a place that, challenged them to do that, because it just isn't like home. The power doesn't go on every day. And I feel like that's been one of my biggest takeaways, is that I think at first I tried to find ways to really like lock it all down and have all the answers. And really I had to go back to the roots of this type of work, which is, it's the adventure. Like, some of the answers are not going to be there when we start, and that's okay. We just have to be willing to step forward and be brave and try those things and make sure that we're trained and appropriately supporting each other as we go into those things, and that the learning that comes from that back in the everyday world is immense, and it helps us see where we want to be spending our time and what we want to be doing day to day, and what we're really capable of, and how to ask for support, and how to support others when they need it, and how to have challenging conversations, because all of that comes up when you're in the outdoors, just based on the fact that you've got to live in a different way. And so, to finish up with that and answer the rest of your question, that's really, shown us that, this model can work in an incredibly powerful way in healthcare. Once again, whether it's in a model like Leading X, where we're out for a whole week. Chris Bombardier is one of our staff members, and envisioned the program Backpacks and Bleeders, and started that with the Colorado chapter, where they're kind of on the other side of like taking folks on smaller hikes regularly and building up, and that's an incredible model, and such a supportive way for a chapter to come in and help folks experience the outdoors in little chunks, so that if you're really nervous about doing something like a Leading X, you can start small and then build and build and build, and get that sustained support from a community. And or whether you're out on a ropes course with us for a couple of days, all of those places create these opportunities for change, and we just see this as a model that we would love to take out to other groups that experience chronic health conditions as part of their life, as well as for their providers, folks that have early onset MS, folks that are, dealing with type 1 diabetes, folks that have sickle cell disease. There are so many communities out there that have, certainly different challenges based on the medical side, but the psychosocial stuff is so similar, because we're all human. We've all got those same 5 core emotions, and when they show up in the outdoors, they look pretty similar no matter who you are. So giving folks that opportunity to learn and grow from those experiences is really where we want to continue to go with GutMonkey, and help spread that for the people that are out there, and then help spread those stories, so that even if you're really not ready to get off the couch right now, you can maybe take somebody else's inspiration and be like, well, I might not be getting in a canoe today, but I think I'm at least going to get off the couch and go for a walk in the park.
Yeah, sometimes that is your mountain to climb, right? It's just getting up off the couch and going for a walk in the park. In conclusion, where can people learn more about GutMonkey and the programs GutMonkey offers?
Yeah, absolutely. GutMonkey.com. Real simple. You can definitely check out what we're doing at GutMonkey.com. And if you just go to the goods, that does a listing of all of our programs. And there's also a contact space there. Folks can feel free to email us, and my telephone number's on there. We try to be real accessible to the community. So I'm always happy to take calls and chat with people and answer questions, because sometimes even just that, having taken a lot of teens out whose parents, in an email are saying absolutely not, they'll never go. Sometimes a 10-minute conversation is enough to be like, okay, I just needed to talk it out, to make all the difference in helping folks take that first step. So anybody can feel free to give a call.
Pat, thank you again for the time today, and for giving us a window into your perspective on why the outdoors are important, why experiential education is important, and reducing maybe some of the misconceptions and stigma around what it means to participate in the world around us, and to pick our heads up from the phones that we can become attached to. So thank you for that. And again, GutMonkey.com to learn more about all of GutMonkey's work. Yeah,
thank you, Patrick. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for having this opportunity for folks in the community to be able to learn about so many subjects. So great to be here with you.
Thank you again, Big Dog Pat Torrey, for taking the time to join Ask the Expert. I know I certainly appreciate hearing Pat's perspective on why experiential outdoor education is important, and I hope you all felt similarly. Learn more about GutMonkey and Pat's work by visiting GutMonkey.com. And that is all for episode 9 of the Ask the Expert podcast series. We'll be back next month with another expert interview. BloodStreamMedia.com is your one-stop shop for all of BloodStream Media's podcasts for the bleeding disorders community. Once on BloodStreamMedia.com, don't forget to follow the links to subscribe to the Ask the Expert podcast, the BloodStream podcast, the Powering Through podcast, and the Bloodline podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have an idea for a future episode of Ask the Expert? Have a question that you would like to hear an expert answer? Email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. You'll also find Bloodstream Media on Facebook.com/BloodstreamMedia and on Twitter @BloodstreamInfo. This episode of Ask the Expert was written by Patrick James Lynch, produced by Patrick James Lynch, Rob Bradford, Andrew Gall, Josh Bragg, Ava Friedman, and Colby Crow. Artwork by Ryan Gielen and Katie Wright Mead, and the Ask the Expert podcast is edited by Mr. Andrew Gall. Special thanks to GutMonkey Founder and CEO Pat Torrey. I'm your host, Patrick James Lynch, and until next time, take self-care of yourself.